Hello, everyone. Thank you again for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, Analysis is a Team Sport. Like Erica mentioned, my name is Ryan Hallback, and I am one of many principal intelligence analysts here at the Vertex project. And today I am joined here with my teammate, Mary Beth Lee, and we're going to talk to you about Stories, the collaborative reporting tool native to our intelligence system, Synapse. Today, we're going to cover a brief introduction to Synapse, go over some common reporting challenges that we encounter as analysts and analyst teams, cover our solutions to these reporting challenges, and highlight some of its core features. And then we're going to walk you through some use cases and give you a case study, specifically a threat intelligence case study that you can address using Stories. But before we talk about Stories, let's talk a little bit about Synapse for those of you who are not familiar with it. At Vertex, one of the challenges that we commonly faced as threat intelligence analysts was the ability to perform analysis and produce intelligence using a single system, or even a system of systems or platforms or software. What we wanted was the ability to perform every stage of the intelligence lifecycle in a single system. That's planning, data collection and processing, analysis, and reporting. What we realized is that as organizations look more and more to leverage cross-domain data to perform holistic analysis and transform that data into actionable intelligence, analysts needed a way to merge and represent that data and collaborate in real time and uniformly interact with that data. We couldn't do it. So we built Synapse, a system that allows you to fuse cross-domain data, platforms, and teams. So as a whole, there are several challenges that Synapse addresses. But today, the challenge and solution that we're going to talk about is the one that's most often overlooked, but arguably one of the most important because of its impact, and that's reporting. So what are some of these reporting challenges that we face as analysts? In the past, if I were asked to perform some research and report on my findings, what would my workflow look like? And I'm pretty sure a lot of you out there can relate. First, if you look to the left, I would be on my analyst workstation, and I would have to access or find some way to access multiple systems to access the data that I needed for my research, whether it's sandbox data or endpoint data. I would have to log into some database. Then I would have to find a way to merge that data into an application where I can do my analysis and capture my assessments. Maybe that's a TIP, so a threat intelligence platform, or an Excel spreadsheet, sadly, to admit. Then I would create a draft using a separate application like Microsoft Word, where I would manually add the analysis data, create visuals, and maybe some pivot tables. Then I would iterate through this review cycle, where I would have my draft, send a draft to each individual reviewer. Then the reviewers would look at my document in stovepipes. They would have no visibility into what the other person was saying. They would send me their responses individually where I have multiple versions of my document. And then I would have to go through and adjudicate those comments and deconflict where necessary. And I would go through this review cycle until I didn't have any more comments to address. This workflow is problematic, and it presents several challenges. It's extremely difficult, firstly, for me to just collaborate with my team and produce a report. This is especially true when I need to collaborate with people on different teams with a different set of expertise, like a reverse engineer or maybe a geopolitical analyst. Not being able to collaborate in a central environment created version explosion, where I would have multiple versions of the document floating around, which would make it difficult for me to address comments, and it's just time consuming. Another issue that I ran into was just opaque analysis. So whenever someone was looking at my report, or when I'm reviewing my peers' reports, one of the first questions that I would have is, hey, how did you come to this conclusion? Where's the data to support this? Whenever you create a report in a system separate from the system that you use to analyze your data, it's challenging for other people to review your work. Sure, you can include data in line in the report, but it's not enough for others to replicate your analysis. And what you run into is the possibility of introducing incorrect data because you're manually copying and pasta, I say copy pasta, but pasting data into the report. So if we take all of this, coupled with the fact that, hey, I have to use an external application to create my report, which sometimes has formatting and backwards compatibility issues, this is just a workflow that's not viable for my team. All of these challenges come at a cost to me and my organization. So anytime you have a reporting workflow that's decentralized and tedious, you increase the likelihood for a high number of reporting errors, a low production rate, a slow production schedule, and just analyst burnout. As analysts, we need the ability to create timely and accurate reports. So what happens when you have data separate from the report? Either your reviewers are going to take a long time to review your analysis, or they're not going to verify it at all. Neither of these are ideal, because if I publish a report 3 days after the community has already addressed a set of activity, this reduces the intelligence from simply being an OSINT summary or a regurgitation of what someone else has already published. Another problem is that, hey, what if I publish an incorrect assessment? This messes up your analytical credibility. And more importantly, you could lead your data consumers down the wrong path and cause them to take the wrong course of action. So what was our solution to this problem? It was pretty simple. Remove the external tool dependencies and create and integrate a reporting tool where we do analysis. Create a tool where analysts and teams could collaborate and create reports directly where we do the assessments. Our solution was stories. So let's see what this looks like. Stories is a native Synapse reporting tool that allows your team to juxtapose data and analysis with a narrative and visuals to create a comprehensive intelligence report. It provides a single interface where your team can create, review, share, and store reports. So you can think of stories like analytical exposés, where you can track your research and perform team-wide collaboration and coordination by providing visibility into current analysis tasks. There are several advantages that we have when we're working with stories. The main benefit is that we don't have to leave our analysis platform. This allows us to integrate data and have others vet our analysis. Analysis verification is possible because with stories, whenever you add a data element to a report, the query used to yield that data is automatically embedded in line with that element. Stories also make report composition super simple. You can add content using Markdown, use the drag and drop feature to format and reorganize your story easily, and add data projections like force graphs or geopolitical data that's automatically created by Synapse based on the data you're analyzing at that time. So going back to the traditional reporting workflow, what you have is the requirement to use separate software to perform both analysis and create a report. You have a scattered review cycle where you introduce a version explosion problem, and collaborators don't have any visibility into what contributions teammates are making in real time. Now let's check out the reporting workflow using stories. Let's say my team received a research request from an external customer. My teammate Chris will go into Synapse, go to the stories dashboard, and he would create a story to capture his research and analysis. Once he has an initial draft, he would give us permission to edit the story. I can then go into the stories dashboard to view the story and leave comments. And at the same time, my teammate Jen can go in, but she can have a different purpose. She can start verifying his analysis by using the query data that's automatically embedded in the stories by Synapse. Chris goes back in to address some of our comments, but then Jen can also decide to go back in and, let's say, change a few typos that she saw earlier on. Once that's all said and done, I can go ahead and give our co-founders access to view the story and give us the final thumbs up. And once we have that, Chris could export the story to a PDF and share it with an external customer. Now, this workflow is completely different than the workflow I previously described, and the workflow that we're used to primarily as analysts, unfortunately. It's centralized. You have a lot of activity happening in parallel. Everyone has visibility into what's happening in the review cycle, and it's happening in real time. When it's all said and done, what you walk away with is a well-formed and vetted intelligence report created by a team of analysts using an efficient workflow in a single system. So what are some of the features and use cases for stories? Our main goal in creating stories was to create a native Synapse environment that not only allowed you to create a report and share that report, but that also facilitated collaboration and promoted analytical rigor. So each feature that you see here supports that goal, and it allows you to do that. Everything from the dashboard to the comment feature to having query integration and the ability to export a report and share it with others. All of these things work together to allow your team to meet your intelligence goals. So stories are flexible and they can be used in a lot of ways, both internally and externally. So for an example, at Vertex, one of the most common ways that we use stories is to report our research and findings to our external customers. But we also use it as a personal workspace or scratch space to track our research and give our teammates visibility into what we're working on. You can also use stories for things like analyst peer review, blog drafting, and creating a daily briefing to summarize the current state of threat for your stakeholders. So those are just some of the use cases that we have and that some of our current customers use stories for. But now we're going to show you how you can use stories using a threat intelligence case analysis by MV.
Thanks, Ryan. Let me share my screen quickly. Okay, so to get a sense of how an analyst might end up using stories to report their findings, let's pretend that we're back in October 2020, and the US Department of Justice has just indicted 6 Russian nationals, and they've charged them with a number of computer network operation related crimes that they allegedly conducted on behalf of the Russian government. So when this indictment comes out, our team lead, Vizzy, asks us 2 questions. The first thing that he wants to know is what is this indictment about? What are they talking about? And then the second question is whether any of the activity that the indictment covers is related to something that we've tracked before. Do we already know about some of this, or is it all completely new? So the first thing that we do is we go ahead and we model the indictment in our Cortex. So we have 2 media news nodes. The first one is the indictment itself, and then the second one is Exhibit A, which is just the appendix. You might recognize the tag that we're using to lift this. If you've heard us talk about tags before, then you may remember that we use them for 2 main purposes. One of them is just to organize and correlate data, and the second one is to encode analytic assessments. For this, we're just using it to organize all the data that we're probably going to end up using for a story for Vizzy. So we're using a tag vtx.story.maplebutter because we were hungry. In addition to modeling the indictment itself, we also went ahead and we pulled out all of the data that the indictment mentioned that we wanted to capture and that we thought was relevant. This ends up being a range of information. Some of it is pretty technical, like email addresses and headers and domain names. Some of the other information that we modeled is a little bit more strategic in nature, like the people that were indicted, the organizations that they worked for or targeted. And then we went ahead and we also modeled the different campaigns that they engaged in that the indictment identified. So when we were modeling this, though, we noticed that there were a few domains actually that already had a cno.threat tag, which is an analytic tag. These domains were tagged with cno.threat.t167, which let us know that they're part of a threat cluster that we had already been researching, threat cluster 167. So at this point, we'd probably go and take advantage of some of the services and integrations within Synapse to try and build this out a little bit more, enrich those indicators. And we might end up with a bigger threat cluster, a range of data. We have a little bit under 100 nodes. So now we think we have a pretty good answer to Vizzy's question. We have a sense of what the indictment covers, and we also know that it overlaps with activity that we were tracking as 167. So now we can start building our story for him. So to build the story, we'll just go over to the stories tool on this side. I'll add a new story. and it will prompt us to enter a title and a description. These are things that you can edit later at any time. So you can always start out with like MB story, and then when you actually come up with a good title, you can edit it in later. We'll create, and there's our story right there. So this is what your storyboard will end up looking like. We will have our main story is going to be located right here in the middle. And then we have our toolbar on this side where we can add things like certain elements. We can go ahead and add in our title and description. Since we already wrote those out, we'll drag it into place. So how I'm going to do this is, rather than walk you through, make you watch me build this entire story out, I'm just going to highlight some of the key features that I think are pretty important. Mainly, it's going to be how to add different elements. The first one we'll talk about is just how to add text, so that you can include assessments and mark it down, or sorry, assessments and context. So we use the Markdown editor for text. It's pretty easy to use. Everything that you can do, well, a lot that you can do in like a Word document are the same types of things that you can do in a Markdown editor. For the example, I'm going to copy and paste some text that I wrote out, because one of the things I realized about myself in preparing for this webinar is I can't type and talk at the same time. So some of the things that we use for this one is that we made a hyperlink to the actual indictment itself, so Busy could click on it and see what that file actually says. We also use some color coding. You can also use like bold, italics, things like that. And you can also make tables in there if you really want to. We can go ahead and also edit the title, so it doesn't just say Markdown. And then Busy will know what we're talking about there. In addition to adding text, we can also add images. You have two options. We can select from a file, or we can use a URL. We're just going to pull from a file. And we'll add in the wanted poster that came along with the indictment, so that Busy can see that who was actually indicted, and it will show up there in our clipboard. And we'll just drag it in. And all of the elements you can move around and you can resize to fit. Let's see, let's move that down, and we'll resize this so it's even. Then again, I just want to redo the title so that it's actually a title. We'll name it FBI wanted poster in case there's any sort of confusion. So now we have text, we have images. The most important thing that we want to add is the data. And when we add the data, we have a couple different options for how we can visualize it. We can have tabular view, we can have a statistics view, force graph, and geospatial. So you can choose the best way to represent the particular data that you're using. The first type of data that we're going to use is we're going to introduce the people who were indicted. And for that, we'll go ahead and use tabular view. Let me just grab my query. And to add the data, we'll just go back over to our research bar, and we'll lift the nodes that we want. And these are already pre-selected in certain columns that I want displayed, which I can change around if I'd like. Let's see, in this case, we'll go ahead and we'll just add it to the story. And you can make some minor adjustments here too, if you want. You can also, if I decide like, I really don't like this element, I can delete it. Let's say I kind of want their names first. So I'm going to deselect those and put the names. Let's do the names, date of birth, the title, then we'll do organization. I think that makes the most sense. And then we'll add. And we'll fit it to the space. And if I decide that it doesn't quite fit, I can always zoom out a little bit. And there we go. I'll get the full GRU name. And if I change my mind about any of the properties that are displayed, like if I don't really want the date of birth, I can just deselect it. If we had their addresses, which the indictment didn't give us, we could, decide to display that. I'm going to change the title of this widget because I don't want him to just think that they're PS contact nodes. We'll just say indicted Russian officers. And one of the things that is most powerful, I think, about stories is that it's integrated into Synapse. And so besides being able to add the data directly, you can also push edits really easily. Like say that this first officer, say that I messed up when I was modeling this data and he's not really a military intelligence officer. I misread the indictment and he's actually their chef. I can go over to the nodes and I can update. And then rather than having to go and chase down every single story where this appears and make that same edit in multiple different places, I can just go over to the menu on this side and just refresh the nodes and it will pull the latest data and automatically update so that he has the chef title there. Later, another thing that's useful is that if someone else is reviewing this later and they want to know like, well, where did you get these people? What they can do is they can go over to the menu for that particular element and copy the query, and it will copy the query that I used for that to their clipboard, and they can just go back and search it. And if they need to do any more digging around to verify that data, it's a really easy way to do that. So that's adding data in the tabular view. One of the other things that the indictment mentioned that will give us an example of using another view is that they noted that the officers work out of a place called the tower, which we modeled as a geoplace node. Yeah, there we go. So I could add it as a tabular view. This isn't really that interesting of a way to show that data. So what we'll do instead is we'll go to the geospatial view and we'll search it there. And it comes up and that's their workspace. We have a few different options that we could do here as well. If I wanted to show like a light view or dark view, I'm pretty partial to the satellite view, so I think we'll just keep that. And can go over and I can add that to the story. And it will show up in my clipboard and I can just drag it over. And then once it's over here, I can also tap that edit pen and I can decide if I want to try and like zoom in a little bit more, or if I decide, you know, I really am not into the satellite view, I want to try like light view or dark view. I am not a fan of dark view. I think for all of my stories, I make them all satellite view because I like to see what's around there. We'll change the title of that again. So Vizzy knows what we're talking about. So let's see, that's tabular view and that's geospatial view. The next one that I'll show you is force graph view. And this could be helpful, particularly helpful if you're trying to showcase activity. In this case, we're going to use some color-coded nodes to show the overlap between the activity that was discussed in the indictment and the activity that we saw as threat cluster 167. So the indictment is all of the orange nodes and the gray nodes, and then the red nodes are the overlap that we saw. And we'll go ahead and we'll add that to the story. And we'll make this one pretty big because I want to be able to zoom in so he can see what those nodes actually are. So we'll go over to, then he can see that they were domains. And then last but not least, we have the stats view, which in this case, we can use to show some of the different organizations that were targeted. And we'll just show like a geographic distribution so you can get a sense of how widespread some of their operations were. Let's pick this one because it's a little bit better display. And I'll just drag it into place. And we can retitle that so he knows what we're talking about. Okay, so now we've gone through adding Markdown, we've gone through adding pictures, we've gone through adding data and the 4 different ways to visualize it. At this point, let's jump ahead to our pre-baked and finalized story, and we'll go over what it actually ends up looking like. So this is what our story ends up being. Here we just switched it over from edit view to preview mode. So we have the title and the description that we wrote previously. We have our markdown text with the summary of our findings for Vizzy, so he knows what we're talking about. We have the FBI wanted poster that accompanies our summary. We have our indicted officers, their different titles, their dates of birth, the military organization that they specifically were in, Unit 74455. We have a little bit about the GRU, which is the organization that they work for. We include where it's based on the map. And then we also have a street view of the building in case Vizzy wants to visit and needs to see what the outside looks like. We also talk about the tower because this unit specifically worked out of the tower. They did not work out of the GRU headquarters. And then we have the same map location. We also have the street view so that Vizzy can tell his Uber driver. We have the strategic indicators that were mentioned in the report in the indictment. We include the different campaigns that they engaged in. And we have the different goals that these campaigns were in pursuit of. We talk a little bit about the targeted organizations, the ones that we were able to identify. And he can scroll and see everything that was here. And then we show the different locations that each of these organizations were based out of. So he has a sense of how widespread some of this targeting was. Then we also include the technical indicators that were mentioned in the report: emails, lures, domains, file strings, URLs, file names. And then we talk about some of the overlap that we saw between the activity that was identified in the indictment and what we had been tracking as threat cluster 167. And we show our force graph showing the overlap there. And then we include a little threat group profile for 167, talking about, just to show off to him, give him a brief overview of like what we actually know about this cluster of activity, what we've been able to find and build out, so that he's familiar with it in case he has to brief anybody. And we have a force graph view of that particular threat cluster of activity. And then we talk about some of the public reporting that we've known about that and previously modeled that overlaps with what was reported in the indictment. Because a lot of this activity, because it covered so many different campaigns, a lot of it had been previously published on. And we include some of those media news nodes for those various blogs and reports and other indictments that had come out that covered it. And then we close it with a conclusion. So this is the rough draft of my story. And at this point, I could send it to Vizzy, but I think what would make me a lot happier first is if I had one of my coworkers take a look at it, just in case I made typos or put in something that really makes no sense. I'd rather that they catch it before Vizzy does. So one of the things I can do is go over to story settings by the menu, and I can give one of my colleagues the ability to view my story. I can also allow them to edit. So I'm going to select Ozzy because he has looked at my work before and I trust him. And I'm going to give him edit permissions. So now Ozzy can go in and edit my story. One of the things that Ozzy might do is leave me some comments. There are a couple different ways that you can leave comments. You can leave a general comment, but you can also leave a comment that's specific to an element or specific to certain text. So the first one, we'll go back to edit view. The first one, it looks like Ozzy left me a comment that's specific to certain text. He noticed that I missed a word here. So at this point, I can send him a reply, like, thanks, buddy. I can add that to the comment. I can go in and fix this. The indictment. There we go. And then since I addressed it, I can go ahead and resolve that. And once I resolve it, it will kind of like fade into the background. It's no longer highlighted. And then later, if I've resolved something, but it ends up still being an issue, I can always go and reopen that comment. Let's see, found a typo, and that will bring me up to where he found it. Yep, that is a typo. Good job, Ozzy. You can go and edit it. And I can resolve that out. And this is an example of one that I already did resolve, but this is an element specific comment. And so it's just for this specific element. And to add it, he would just go to the menu there and click add comment. So that's the comment feature. I think at this point, I'm probably ready to send it to Busy. So to do this, I have two different options. The first one, I can share it with Busy the same way that I shared it with Ozzy, because Busy has access to Cortex. So I can go over to the menu, go to story settings, and I can add Busy as a user. And I can give him viewer perms. Another option that I have is I can go and export it out of the Cortex. And this would be an option if I wanted to either email it to Busy or print it out and give him a hard copy. I can just export it as a PDF and give it to him that way. And one of the things that is particularly useful about this is that the way that Stories is built out within Synapse is that there's line breaks that you're not allowed to, if I tried to add an element that would be on a line and be stuck between two pages, I actually wouldn't be able to do that. It would bump me to either the page before or the page after. So all of our elements are adhere to the page boundaries, which is helpful. So that's Stories. Thank you for taking the time to join Ryan and I today. If you haven't already, I would highly suggest signing up for the next Synapse one-on-one webinar. It's a good way to learn more about who we are, what Synapse is, why we built it, and how you can use it. You can also join us next month to see what we're doing with Yara. In the meantime, you can chat with us on Slack. We're happy to answer questions, point you towards different resources that we have. You can follow us on social media. And we'd love to learn more about you and how we might be able to help. So feel free to schedule a time to chat one-on-one with Erica. Thank you again for hanging out with us today, and we hope it was helpful.